The morning after he told me, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I never drank and watched the sun come up over the backyard we had spent 3 years arguing about how to landscape. He was still upstairs, sleeping. I remember thinking how strange that was, that a person could say what he said and then just go to bed. My name is not important to this story. What matters is that I was 31 years old, I had been married for 6 years, and I had spent most of those 6 years being the quieter one, the one who kept track of things, the one who noticed when the insurance renewal was due, when the property tax hit, when the credit card balance crept up, because he had a habit of buying things he described as investments and I described as clutter. We stored in the garage. His name was Trevor. We met when I was 24, and he was 30, and at the time, I thought his confidence was the most attractive thing about him. He walked into rooms like he had already decided he was the most interesting person in them. I thought that was charisma. It took me years to understand it was just a very specific kind of loneliness dressed up as certainty. We bought the house in Ohio 4 years into the marriage. A colonial on a corner lot in a suburb that had good schools we didn't need yet, and neighbors who waved from driveways on Saturday mornings. It was my down payment, not ours. Mine. Money I'd saved since my first real job at 22. Money I had added to every year while living below my means. Money my grandmother had left me when she passed the year before we got engaged. Trevor knew this. He had signed the paperwork. My name was first on the deed. He worked in sales, regional director for a medical device company, which meant he traveled a lot, which meant I managed everything at home, which meant I became very good at managing everything at home while also working full-time as a financial analyst for a firm downtown. I was used to systems. I was used to being the person who held things together without anyone noticing that things were being held together. That's the thing no one tells you about being competent. People stop seeing it as effort. It just becomes the baseline. The water they swim in. The night it happened was a Wednesday in March. I had texted him twice during the day. Once to ask if he was coming home for dinner. Once to ask if he could pick up the dry cleaning on his way back. He read both messages. He didn't respond to either one. He got home at 11:15. I heard the garage door, then his keys on the kitchen counter. He always tossed them too hard. They always skidded, and then his footsteps through the hallway. I was in the living room. I had been reading, or trying to read, though I'd turned the same page 4 times without absorbing a single word. He came in, and he looked at me, and he didn't say hello. He said, "I need to tell you something." I put the book down. He told me that for the past 4 months he had been seeing someone, a woman named Becca who worked in the marketing department of his company. They had met at a regional conference in Indianapolis in November, and it had been going on since then, and he wasn't planning to end it. He said that last part like it was a business decision he had already finalized, like he was delivering news about a merger, not about my marriage. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was doing something I had learned to do a long time ago. I was getting very still inside, not numb, still. There's a difference. Numb is when you stop feeling. Still is when you feel everything at once and decide none of it gets to move through your face right now. "Okay," I said. He blinked. He had clearly expected something else. "That's it?" he said. "Okay. What would you like me to say, Trevor?" He shifted his weight. I watched him try to read my expression and fail. "I don't know. Something. Anything. You could be upset." "I am upset. You don't look it." "I know." He stood there for another moment, and then he said something I have thought about almost every day since. He said, "I'm not asking for a divorce. I'm not going to pretend this isn't happening. You can deal with it or you can't, but I'm not ending things with her." And then he went upstairs. And I sat there, and I finished my tea. Here's what Trevor did not know about me, and I say this not with pride exactly, but with the particular clarity of a person who has spent years being underestimated by someone who should have known better. I had known something was wrong since January. Not specifically. Not Becca, not Indianapolis, not the particular shape of what he had done, but I had felt the shift the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Something in the way he answered questions a half second too late. Something in the way he tilted his phone screen away from me when he used to leave it face up on the coffee table without a second thought. I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, and I'm Robert Sinclair, 67 years old, and I notice when people don't add up either. So I had started paying attention, not in a dramatic way. I didn't hire anyone or dig through his email. I just started paying very close attention to the things I was already entitled to see. Our joint bank account, the credit card statements, the calendar we shared that he had mostly stopped updating. In February, I had a conversation with a family law attorney in Columbus, a woman named Patricia who had been recommended by a colleague of mine. I told Patricia what I suspected and what I owned and what our financial picture looked like, and she told me what my options were and what I should do to protect myself. I had spent 6 weeks doing exactly that, not hiding money, not anything illegal or even underhanded. Just organizing, making sure that what was mine was clearly documented as mine. The down payment records, the inheritance paperwork, the contribution history on my 401k, which I had never once let him touch, the business account for the freelance consulting I did on the side, which was in my name only, and which he had never paid much attention to because he didn't pay much attention to anything that didn't have his name on it. By the time Trevor came home that Wednesday night and told me about Becca, I had already had 2 more conversations with Patricia. I already knew what divorce looked like for me in the state of Ohio. I already knew about equitable distribution. I already knew that the house, because of how it was purchased, because of the documentation I had maintained, would almost certainly remain mine. I had already begun to make a plan. He slept until 9 the next morning. I was up at 5:30. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, and I made a list of everything I needed to do in the next 30 days, and then I folded the list and put it in my bag. And then I went for a walk around the neighborhood because it was almost spring and the air smelled like wet soil, and I wanted to remember what it felt like to breathe without my chest being tight. It had been a long time since I had breathed without my chest being tight. When I got back, he was in the kitchen. He was making eggs. He was acting like nothing had happened, which was somehow the most clarifying thing he could have done. Morning, he said. Morning. He put eggs on 2 plates. He set one in front of me. I ate it because I was hungry and because not eating it would have required an explanation I wasn't ready to give. We sat at that table for 20 minutes and barely spoke, and I thought about the woman Patricia had described to me. The woman who left her marriage with almost nothing because she hadn't documented anything. Because she had assumed that the life she built together was as much hers as it was his. Because no one had ever told her to pay attention to the paperwork. I thought about her, and I thought about myself, and I felt something quiet and certain settle in my stomach. I was not going to be that woman. The next several weeks were ordinary on the surface. Trevor went to work. I went to work. We moved around each other in the house with the careful politeness of 2 people who have stopped pretending to be fine and started simply being civil. He didn't mention Becca again. I didn't ask. There was nothing to ask that I didn't already have an answer to. I called Patricia twice more. I called my best friend, Dawn, who had been my closest friend since college and who drove 4 hours from Pittsburgh on a Friday night to sit on my back porch with a bottle of wine and listen to me talk for 3 hours without once telling me what I should do, which is exactly what I needed. Dawn was the only person I told, not because I didn't have other people I trusted, but because I had learned, watching the way things fell apart for other people in similar situations, that the fewer people who knew, the cleaner things stayed. There is a particular kind of woman who handles things quietly. I had been that woman my whole life. People had sometimes read it as coldness. I had learned to let them. On a Tuesday evening in April, 6 weeks after the night in the living room, Trevor came home and I was waiting for him at the kitchen table. Not sitting in the living room this time? I had thought about that. I had chosen the kitchen deliberately because the kitchen is where things get decided in a house. It is a practical room. It does not encourage dramatics. I had a folder in front of me. He came in, saw me, saw the folder, and stopped. "What's this?" he said. "Sit down, Trevor." He sat. I told him that I had filed for divorce 2 days ago, that the papers had already been processed, and that he would receive them officially within the week, that I had retained an attorney, that I had a full accounting of our shared assets, and that given the way the house was purchased and financed, it would be staying with me. He stared at me. "You're serious," he said. "Yes," I thought. He stopped, started again. "I thought we were figuring things out. You told me you weren't ending things with her. You told me I could deal with it or I couldn't. I made my decision." "That's not, I meant we had time. I meant Trevor." I kept my voice level. "I want you to move out by the end of the month. You can take your personal belongings, your car, your retirement accounts. I'm keeping the house. The details are in the folder." He picked up the folder. He put it down. He looked at me like he was seeing something he had never seen before. And maybe he was, because the woman sitting across from him was someone who had been preparing for this conversation for 6 weeks. And the woman he thought he knew was someone who would fall apart when the moment came. Those two women were not the same person. He had just never looked closely enough to notice. He moved out in May. He did not go quietly, but he went. There were phone calls from his mother that I didn't return. There were 2 long, escalating text threads that I screenshotted and forwarded to Patricia. There was a weekend where he showed up unannounced and stood on the front porch for 40 minutes before he finally left. And I watched from the upstairs window, and I felt something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite relief. It was something more like grief for the person I had thought he was when we stood in a different doorway and promised each other things we didn't end up keeping. That feeling came and went. I let it. I had a therapist, Dr. Renner, who I had been seeing quietly since February, and I had Dawn, and I had the particular discipline of a woman who knows how to do the next right thing, even when she doesn't feel like it. I went to work. I managed the house. I refinanced the mortgage into my name alone. I started running in the mornings not because I am a person who suddenly becomes athletic in crisis, but because I needed something to do with my body while my mind was working through everything else, and running turned out to be the right thing. Some evenings, I sat on the back porch and looked at the yard and thought about all the years I had spent managing a life that I was apparently managing alone anyway, and I thought about what it might feel like to manage a life that was simply and only mine. It felt, I found, like breathing. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, which means the court divides assets fairly, not necessarily equally, but fairly. Because the down payment on the house was documented as coming from my personal savings and my inheritance, because I had maintained clean records of my financial contributions throughout the marriage, because Patricia was very good at her job, the house stayed with me. Trevor received his share of the joint savings account, his car, his retirement accounts. He moved into an apartment in a suburb on the other side of Columbus. I heard through mutual friends that Becca had ended things with him 2 months after he moved out, which I mentioned not because I felt satisfaction about it, or not only satisfaction, but because it seemed like information that completed a picture. He had blown up his marriage for something that wasn't even going to last the year. I thought about that sometimes, not with anger by then, more with the flat, unsentimental clarity of someone reviewing a business decision that turned out to be catastrophically miscalculated. It has been almost 2 years now. The house looks different. I repainted the living room a color I had wanted for years, but he thought was too dark. I turned the second bedroom into an office, which is what I had always wanted, and which is where I am writing this now, at a desk by the window that looks out at the backyard, which I finally landscaped the way I wanted. Dawn comes to visit every couple of months. Dr. Kamizvidi, Renner and I have moved from weekly sessions to monthly check-ins. I still run in the mornings. I have gotten, to my own surprise, genuinely fast. I don't think often about Trevor. When I do, it is mostly without heat. What I think about more is the woman I was in the months before that Wednesday night. The woman who felt the pressure drop and said nothing. Who was so practiced at holding things together that she had stopped asking whether the thing she was holding together was worth saving. There's a version of this story where I cry and rage and fall apart and have to be put back together by the people around me. And maybe that version would have felt more satisfying to watch from the outside, more dramatic, more cathartic, more like what people expect from a story about betrayal. But I was never that woman, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some people process loudly. Some people process in spreadsheets and early morning walks and very careful conversations with attorneys they found through a trusted colleague. Both are valid. One of them just tends to leave you better positioned when the paperwork is done. I want to say something to anyone listening to this who is in the middle of something similar. Because I know you're out there. The comments on these kinds of stories always make that clear. You do not have to perform your pain. You are allowed to be devastated and strategic at the same time. Those two things do not cancel each other out. Getting quiet when something is wrong is not the same as not feeling it. It might just mean you're feeling it in a way that keeps your hands free. Know what's yours. Document it. Talk to someone who knows the law in your state. The paperwork is not unromantic. The paperwork is the thing that protects you when the romance turns out to have been a story only one of you was fully committed to. And the house, if your name is on the deed, if you paid the down payment, if you did the work, the house is yours. I make coffee in my kitchen every morning, and I look out at the yard that is finally the way I wanted it, and I think I built this. And I mean the house, but I also mean everything else. The stability, the savings, the documentation, the quiet discipline of a woman who paid attention when no one was watching. Trevor thought silence meant I had no move to make. He had mistaken patience for passivity his entire marriage. That was his last and most expensive miscalculation. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in some grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way of someone who has watched a very specific sequence of choices lead to a very specific set of consequences and found it almost impossible to argue with the math. Trevor made choices, small ones at first, then larger ones, then the kind that can't be walked back. He chose to stop showing up. He chose to tilt his phone away. He chose to come home at 11 at night and say what he said the way he said it, like he was untouchable. Like the life we had built together was something he could restructure on his own terms, without any input from me. Every one of those choices was his, and every one of them set something in motion that he didn't see coming because he had spent 6 years not paying close enough attention to who he was actually married to. That's the thing about underestimating someone. It doesn't stay theoretical. It has consequences. I'm not telling this story because I think I handled everything perfectly. I didn't. There were nights in those 6 weeks between that Wednesday in March and the Tuesday I sat at the kitchen table with the folder, where I lay awake and felt the kind of grief that doesn't have clean edges. Grief for what I thought we were. Grief for the version of my future I'd been quietly building in my head for years. That grief was real, and I don't want to sand it down into something tidy for the sake of a better ending. But here's what I know now that I didn't fully understand before. Intelligence without courage is just information you never use. I had been paying attention for months. I knew the pattern. I had the instincts. What I had to do was trust them enough to act, to call Patricia, to sit across from a stranger and say out loud what I suspected, to start protecting myself before I had any certainty, because certainty in those situations often comes too late. That took something. I want to be honest about that. It would have been easier to wait and hope. It would have been easier to believe the discomfort I felt was just anxiety, just me being paranoid, just me making something out of nothing the way women are so often told they do, choosing to take yourself seriously when no one around you is doing it. That's not a small thing. It felt, at the time, like the hardest part. And what I want to say about Trevor, not with bitterness, because I genuinely don't have much left, is that the life he lost was one he had already stopped tending. You cannot neglect something for years and then be surprised when it doesn't hold. What happened to him was not bad luck. It was the accumulated result of 1,000 moments where he chose not to pay attention, not to show up, not to treat what he had as something worth protecting. He thought he was the one holding power in that marriage. He thought my silence was submission. He never considered that it might be strategy. I think about Dawn driving 4 hours on a Friday night just to sit on my porch and listen. I think about Patricia, calm and precise across a conference table, laying out exactly what was mine and exactly how to keep it. I think about Dr. Renner asking me, week after week, what I actually wanted. Not what was fair, not what was logical, but what I wanted. Those 3 women helped me find my way back to myself in a season when it would have been very easy to lose the thread entirely. You don't get through something like this alone. That matters too. What I hope anyone takes from this, if you're in it right now, if you're lying awake feeling that pressure in your chest and telling yourself you're probably overreacting, is that paying attention is not paranoia. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. Getting quiet is not the same as giving up. Sometimes it is exactly the opposite. Sometimes the stillest person in the room is the one who has already decided what comes next and is simply waiting for the right moment to act. Trevor had one move. He played it loudly in the middle of the living room at 11 at night. I had been preparing my response for 6 weeks. That's not luck. That's what happens when you finally decide to take yourself as seriously as you should have all along.